Our guests today on Let's Talk Jonesboro are two ladies, both doctors, with a group called Moms Demand Action. Now, Moms Demand Action is a fill in the blank for me, please,
Sure.
Dr. Rebekah Evans.
Moms Demand Action is a gun violence prevention organization. So we advocate for common ground, common sense, middle ground solutions to gun violence that keep people safe and at the same time uphold the Second Amendment. So many of our members are gun owners or are married to gun owners. So we believe it's important to promote responsible gun ownership and gun sense policies that keep us all safe.
Wonderful. Now, Dr. Lynn Boyd is a survivor of an incident, but Doctor, tell us a little bit about the word middle ground. It's not one that works very well sometimes when we discuss gun issues.
Well, I think we all agree that we want to be safe. We want to reduce the amount of gun violence. I think that's a common ground that we can all come to. We need to find a way to get there, but I think that's where we start. We want our kids to be safe. We want our churches and our communities to be safe, and that's the common ground.
That's right. And we have a paradigm that when people say they are pro-Second Amendment, there is no conversation to be had from there. When they say they want some, whether you call it common sense laws in gun control or however your passions lend toward that, sometimes we tend to shove people to the side when we really agree on things most of the time.
Right.
And we have to work now these days, it seems, to really connect with that middle ground. Nobody wants a loved one shot.
Right.
No one wants to be shot. We have to start with that and then work for solutions. And I think that is what you guys are standing for at this moment.
Absolutely. We really want to promote these conversations. We really believe that upholding the Second Amendment goes hand in hand with good policies that keep us safe. And we want to absolutely promote responsible gun ownership, safe storage of guns, and all practices that we can agree on together that are important. Like, for instance, about 85% of us agree that things like background checks on gun sales are really important. And yet, we live in this polarized extremist world right now where we're not talking to each other very much.
Right. And part of it is because people, I think, who own guns feel like they have the right to defend themselves or whatever purpose they want to do. Obviously, in Arkansas, to go hunting, and anywhere else, I guess, unless you're in an urban area, that's a viable right. But we also have a right to feel safe without having to have a gun on us to protect ourselves all the time. So.
And we have to have these conversations, and we have to do something. I think this fear that the Second Amendment rights might be violated is not a good reason to do nothing. We have to do something because the gun violence in this country is at ridiculously high levels, higher than not any, but most other developed nations. So you can't just sit back and do nothing.
And Dr. Boyd, you say that coming from a position of experience. Can you tell us, I think some people are aware and recall that how many years ago there was a shooting by a professor at the University of Alabama in Huntsville, and you were in that building as it happened.
I was in the room. It was at a faculty meeting. It's actually going to be 10 years here in a couple of weeks. The 10-year anniversary is coming up. And since I've gotten involved in this survivor fellowship, I've started to kind of recall those memories, and they're still really difficult. So we were sitting at a table at a faculty meeting, and one of our faculty colleagues got up and started shooting people in the head, moving around the table. I saw 3 of my good friends die that day, and 2 others who were also shot. I remember sitting on the floor with my friend Joe, holding his head in my hands, just begging him to hold on until the medics got there, and seemed like a really long time. He survived for another 7 years, but the toll that just dealing with that took on him and his family was awful, and you don't want to see that happen to anybody. It's a hard story to tell, and it shouldn't be happening. The person who shot, since she would have shot all of us, but her gun jammed. So I was very lucky in that respect. I always wonder, why was I lucky? Why am I the one who gets to see my kids graduate from high school and go to college and do all these things, and they don't? But
you're also the one who has to tell the story now, or feels motivated to tell the story.
Yeah, it does bring me some comfort to know that maybe I can be part of changing the story here in this country and making it safer for other people. Because she should have never had a gun. She had a history of gun violence. She had a history of other violence that was documented in police stations, and that she should have never had access to a gun. So I think there's things that we can do to keep people from from getting guns.
Is that not the simple problem, if there is a simple problem, that guns are in the hands of people they don't belong in,
Right.
in too many cases? Do you guys find that to be the case?
And that's certainly part of the problem, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
What type of things are you guys advocating right now, Dr. Evans?
Well, one of the things that we talk about again and again is simple things that already most of us agree on. Like I mentioned earlier, criminal background checks on every gun sale. There are so many loopholes in the law right now, say through internet sales or gun show sales, that our background check laws, which have stopped that, I don't even know the number right off the top of my head, thousands and thousands of people who should not have a gun from buying guns. Those background check laws have so many loopholes that have yet to be filled that leave us all vulnerable.
Dr. Boyd, you mentioned that you said a survivor fellowship program. I assume this is a pretty wide network or a pretty common thing around the country these days.
Well, yeah, unfortunately there's a lot of us around, and so what every Town for Gun Safety has decided to do is support this fellowship program. So they train people on kind of how to tell your story, because it's hard to do, and so we're all getting together for a meeting in Miami to practice storytelling, support each other, and to help kind of get those stories out so people understand the real impact of gun violence.
And how has that been received? What do you see? What does this program do for people who've been in it?
Well, so I've just gotten in it, and I've done some Skype meetings with people, and it's very powerful. For me, from my perspective, it's extremely powerful and really comforting to be able to know that there's other people going through the same thing, and you can tell just from watching the other survivors that having this connection to other survivors is a really meaningful thing to do. Especially people who've lost immediate family members. Some of the mothers, you hear their stories and you just, I can't even imagine.
And that's the first word of your organization is moms.
Right.
So moms are the one who feel the loss as much as anyone. Mm-hmm. Rebekah, take us back to, now, were you on the ground floor of this, the development of this in Northeast Arkansas?
In Northeast Arkansas, yes. So we have been in existence here in Jonesboro for about 2 years, a little more than 2 years now.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about the experience over the last 2 years, who you've touched, how you've been responded to.
So in the fall of 2017, I think it was right after the mass shooting in Las Vegas, which I believe was the biggest one our country had ever experienced.
Yes.
There were several moms of young kids who happened to all have kids at International Studies School together. and they were talking together and said, we've absolutely got to do something, even here in our hometown. So they reached out to the state Moms Demand Action and created this local group, and I got involved soon thereafter. And it's not just moms, we call it mothers and others, because it's mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and nieces and nephews.
Aunts and uncles in some cases.
Absolutely. Everybody who's interested in working on this together. And one of the best things that has been true is that we've been able to meet and to befriend and to support people who are already doing gun violence prevention work, especially survivor work. So there are so many organizations and so many mothers here already, people like Viola Turner, like Pam Smith, who have organizations like Colors for a Cause or Arky's World, and all these incredible families that are supporting other survivors, that are supporting people through the court process, that are doing grief support groups, that are doing camps for vulnerable children. I mean, it's just amazing what people are already doing. And I think that's one reason that Moms exists. We exist to lift up survivors and to highlight what they're doing, to highlight their voices, to kind of amplify their stories in the community. And I think that's maybe the most important thing we do.
And it's great to have that communal group, because individually it would be easy to just shrink, I would think, under the weight of such a loss. And, you know, we've had Viola Turner on our show in Colors for a Cause. She created a nonprofit strictly in the memory of her son who was killed by gun violence. And to say needless is redundant, but I can imagine that you touch, when you connect with people, it's really heartfelt. It's really a important part of these people's lives.
Well, it's just so empowering and uplifting to all of us to see just how brave and vulnerable and gutsy it is to tell your story when something like this has happened. And so for those of us who've maybe been touched by gun violence, but at a further remove, it's just a privilege to kind of be with these women and men and lift them up and support the work they're already doing.
And Dr. Lynn, you mentioned, I think at one point, that there's not a lot of research funding for this. What do we have any metrics to detail what the toll that this has taken on? I know there are numbers, but the emotional toll, or the way that this issue has changed or impacted America?
Well, we need to do some research on that. Yeah, you know the numbers, 36,000 people a year, and because of the national legislative decisions, we haven't done any federally funded research on what is contributing to it, what are the costs emotionally, socially, economically. And I think it's just so important to do that research, because in order to solve the problem, you have to understand the problem. And you want it to be done by people who can do it in an unbiased, scientifically sound way. You know, we shouldn't do the research. You know, I'm too emotionally attached to it, but I want somebody who's trained, an epidemiologist, a sociologist, who knows how to conduct properly controlled studies to figure out what is really contributing to it. And if it, you know, whatever the results are, let's go somewhere that's going to help us reduce all the suffering and the deaths from gun violence. And if it comes to everybody should have a gun and that's what's going to make us all safe, you know, I'm okay with that. But we need to do it in an unbiased way and make these decisions not just on, you know, how we feel in our guts about it, but kind of what does the evidence show us that this is how we can reduce gun violence.
Well, and that is, I think you hit on another thing that's a problem in our country right now. It has to be done by unbiased sources, and we need to trust unbiased sources. These two ladies are doctors, and so that means they're scientists. And Dr. Boyd is a professor, the dean of College of Sciences and Mathematics at Arkansas State University. Dr. Evans is a clinical psychologist, so they have experience. And whether or not you have bias at this point, that's from an emotional standpoint, that's certainly understandable. But yes, there need to be unbiased, fact-finding missions to help us first really acknowledge that the problem is more than just a bad person with a gun at the moment. And Dr. Evans, I think the other thing that we might have needed to touch on is the fact that suicides are kind of the uncounted toll.
Absolutely. Gun suicide actually makes up 2/3 of all gun deaths, 2/3. So we don't often think about that as a part of the gun violence problem, but it absolutely is. It's a desperate part of the problem. You know, suicide, our children are at risk. Unintentional shootings are a big problem. Gun violence is the second leading cause of death for children in the United States. The first leading cause for African American children. It's dire, and we need to do the research, and we need to follow the research and find out how we can make a difference here.
You know, to talk about the research, so our government does a lot of funding to study problems in our society. So, for example, we're spending about $300 million a year to study tuberculosis, which kills around 500 people a year. We're talking about gun violence killing 36,000 people a year. We're spending $34 billion a year to study AIDS, and that's killing, I think, 16,000 people a year, I believe is the number on that. So we've been spending zero to study something that is killing 36,000 people a year. So it doesn't make sense to me.
It doesn't make sense. And I want to thank you, ladies, and all of your group for having the courage and the determination to stand up for what you believe in. I want everyone to try to treat them with an open mind. Thank you for joining us on Let's Talk. I don't usually add a personal note, but I want to say that Laken Campbell died at the age of 17. She was shot while dog sitting when the owner came home and laid his gun on the counter. And one more personal story that this is serious, and it's felt out in the community.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for being here with us today.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you very much.